A few days ago, I was flipping through old sketchbooks and I found this watercolor painting from 2018 of Link and Zelda from Breath of the Wild. I was really proud of this piece when I first did it, and while my style has changed a lot between now and then, I think it's still a really cute painting. Pretty much as soon as I saw it though, I really wanted to redraw it, so here we are. I haven't used watercolors in at least a few weeks, and I was really itching to try using inks more, so that's the medium I decided to try and use this time around. I also recently saw a video by Pear Flare, I think is how you pronounce it, here on YouTube, where she used a dip pen with inks to make line work, and that really inspired me to try using a dip pen myself. I've never actually bought one before, but I did remember that I got one back in an Art Snacks box a couple of years ago, so after a little bit of digging, I did find the pen and nib. And I haven't really used this dip pen at all outside of swatching, so I did a little bit of a test run just doing very simple doodling before actually recording the line work process, just to make sure that nothing bad would happen with the dip pen itself and it wouldn't just drop ink everywhere, just because I'm extremely unfamiliar with working with dip pens. But everything went well in doing that little test run, so I was really looking forward to inking this way. I don't think the ceramic palette that I used was the depth that's recommended for dip pens, just because it really had a hard time picking up enough ink to do a good amount of line work at a time, so eventually I just got to the point where I started dipping the pen straight into the ink bottle, which helped a lot. I do like the look of colored line work that's done with ink and dip pens, but I tend to be pretty lazy when it comes to doing line work, and this was definitely more time consuming than what I'm used to. Also, I've mentioned this before, but Breath of the Wild was actually my very first Zelda game. I had honestly no interest in the franchise previously, pretty much solely because most of the games and shows that I was into as a kid were because my older brother liked them, and he never bought any of the Zelda games, so I actually never ended up playing any of them. The only reason I even touched Breath of the Wild was because my boyfriend really wanted to get it once we got our Switch, and after watching him play it a little bit, I got really into the game. I'm sure most of you guys have either played it or seen gameplay of it, but it's such a beautiful game, and the open world concept is just so enjoyable. It's such a fun experience, and it pretty much gives you the opportunity to play the game how you want to play it and at the pace you want to play it, and just doing the tasks you would like to do at the time. It's a very fun game. I absolutely love it. But I'm really looking forward to the Hyrule Warriors game that's coming out next month as a prequel to Breath of the Wild, because while I didn't play any Zelda games growing up, I played so much Dynasty Warriors with my brother, so I have a lot of sentimental attachment to any kind of Warriors game, and I personally really like playing them. I know that the hack and slash kind of games really aren't everyone's cup of tea, but either way, I think a lot of people will really enjoy seeing the prequel story-wise to Breath of the Wild, just because you'll be able to see so much content from the same universe. I'm definitely more excited about the actual sequel to Breath of the Wild, but I'm very grateful that in the meantime, before we get that game, we do get the new Hyrule Warriors. I think it'll also be really cool to experience the world of Breath of the Wild before the events of the original game, like I was saying, because you're going to be able to interact with the champions, which are dead in the original game, and it'll be really nice to see some more of Link and Zelda's relationship, because pretty much every Link and Zelda interaction you see in Breath of the Wild that you're shown in memories is very sad, just because everything going on in the story, pretty much every interaction they have is negative, -1 or 2, so I would like to think you'd be able to see more sides of her and just more sides of them interacting together in the new game. Story aside though, I really am excited about playing another Hyrule Warriors game as a whole. Like I said, it's a really fun game for me. I really enjoy that style of game. And even the original Hyrule Warriors, I had such a good time playing. I wasn't super into the story. I know it's a non-canon story, so it's nothing super necessary or super important. It did have a story. I'm sure it was a good story. I honestly don't remember any of it, but I really liked the gameplay of the first Hyrule Warriors, so I'm really excited to see a Breath of the Wild version of Hyrule Warriors. And then back to the drawing for a little bit. For the paper, I used the Arteza, I think their premium paper is what it's called. It's their 100% cotton paper that they sent me a while back, and I still really, really love this paper. It has such a nice texture and holds up a really good amount of water without buckling a ton. Pretty much every cotton paper I've tried up to this point has been a really enjoyable experience to work with, and this one is definitely no exception. For the inks, I used the Roarer and Clear inks that I got from the Hikala art box, as well as a brown Dr. P.H. Martin's ink. Normally, I would start with painting the characters, but I've never painted skin with inks, so I was a little nervous about how that would go because so far I was really happy with how the sketch and line work turned out, so I was a little bit worried that I would end up ruining the piece. But the main reason I decided to start with the background is because I was really annoyed when it came to looking at the stupid gravy stain in the corner of the page, and I just really wanted to cover that as soon as I could, so that's pretty much the first thing I tackled. Because this piece is set on Satori Mountain in the game, I kept pretty much everything the same from the original painting I did. Pretty much the biggest things that I changed was just adding a flower in Zelda's hand, as well as changing the style of the bushes in the background to look less like seaweed and more like actual bushes. I know I drew the original ones to look the way that they did because I was going off of a reference picture, and that's kind of how they looked in the low quality reference picture, but they genuinely looked like seaweed. It was really bad. I think that's probably my least favorite part about the original painting, is just the bushes look so bad. So I decided to go ahead and change that and make them actually look like bushes. However, I'm still really proud of my past self for doing something so detailed compared to my normal art. I feel like the concept for this drawing is something that's kind of out of my comfort zone even right now, just because it has not only one but two characters who are interacting with each other, and on top of that there's some kind of background. It's definitely not the most detailed scenery, but it's still easily out of what I normally do, so I'm really happy to revisit this piece. I want to start creating more artwork that would translate well into being reproduced as stickers and prints, since I'm really hoping to open an online storefront early next year, so I really want to continue making art in that direction. I've gone through small phases here and there in the past of trying to draw scenery and backgrounds, but I think the best way to go about it at this point is just focusing on incorporating backgrounds alongside character art, since that's the end goal for me, at least, for making pieces. Backgrounds as a whole are still something that's a little scary for me to do since they're so unfamiliar, but I really want to push myself in the near future and create pieces that I'm really happy with. I'm also really happy with myself for deciding to paint this piece with inks. I mentioned in my last few videos where I used inks that I really want to branch out and play around with the medium more, and while it functions fairly similarly to watercolor, there are still a lot of factors that make the experience of working with them a lot different. All of the Rohrer and Klinger inks that I have are so vibrant and gorgeous, and I really enjoyed using them for this painting. The only thing that I felt was really missing in this painting compared to the original was that the original's tree had so much vibrancy in it because I had an opera watercolor, which is super pigmented and such a pretty color. I was using the magenta ink for the current piece, which still made it very pink, but it really didn't capture the vibrancy of the original, which was something that I think this painting really needed. I kept trying to layer the ink to build up color, but whenever I'd compare it to the original painting, it was just very obvious that it was nowhere close, so eventually I just pulled out my watercolor palette and put some of the Daniel Smith opera on top. I know a lot of people stray away from using opera watercolor just because they tend to be very low in light fastness, but it's such a pretty color and I think it really helped bring life to this painting. It still dulled down a bit after drying, but adding in the extra watercolor was a big improvement to the saturation of the foliage in the trees. I also got to a point in painting this piece that I was really worried I had messed up Link's skin. I wanted him to have a noticeably darker complexion than Zelda, but anytime I ended up adding magenta to his face to add warmth, it just ended up looking really weird. I went back and forth a lot with adding color to his face, and it got to the point where it was pretty discolored. At one point I went in and I did a very light wash of white poster color on his face, which definitely helped a little bit, but it wasn't until pretty much the very end of the piece when I added a little bit of black line art that I didn't hate how it was turning out. I still think his skin tone is a little bit too similar in tone to his hair color, but all things considered, the final outcome could have turned out a lot worse. The black line work at the very end really did help tie everything together in this piece though. I technically could have done this using the dip pen, but I really like the Uniball Signo DX gel pens, so that's what I ended up using. They're not waterproof by any means, so I would never recommend painting over them unless you intend for the color to bleed, but they do draw really smooth and they have some very small nibs which comes in handy. And then that's pretty much the end of the drawing. I'm sure once the new Hyrule Warriors comes out, I'll do a lot more Zelda fan art because I really love the Breath of the Wild universe and the characters all have such gorgeous designs. I'd love to hear how you guys feel about either the upcoming Hyrule Warriors game or the sequel to Breath of the Wild. I'm sure a lot of you guys are especially excited for the latter. Plus, Zelda has her really cute short hair in that game, so I'm very much so looking forward to that. I also don't mention it often, but if you guys are interested, I do have a Patreon linked below. I currently only have a kind of tip jar tier with behind the scenes digital rewards, but I'm really hoping to offer physical Patreon rewards like prints and stickers soon. Thank you so much to everyone who has already pledged to my Patreon too, all of my patrons. I really appreciate it. It means the world to me. Thank you so much. So like I said, if you're interested in that, a link will always be in the description box below. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.